Hello friends! In this video I'm sharing the top 10 critical mistakes I made during construction, plus a risky experiment. I attempted to fix a frost-heaved foundation without tearing down the structure already built on top of it. Along the way I will also show you a few handy life hacks and casually talk about my approach to land terraforming and time management on a homestead. But first a disclaimer. While some of the techniques in this video turned out well and might look impressive, they're risky, experimental, and not for the faint of heart. Let's rewind to 2013. That's when I poured this foundation and it was a total disaster. As you can see in these clips, the frost warped and lifted the entire structure. At its worst point, the gap under the blind area is big enough to fit a 4-inch pipe. It is painful to look at it because I genuinely try to do everything right. For example, I leveled the blind area with a wire stretched tight like a string line, but the materials failed me. Some of the cement bags produced concrete so weak it crumbles in my hands. And the worst part? Over time, the foundation became so uneven it was no longer usable. In winter, the frozen soil pushed it up, but come spring, the foundation wouldn't settle back down. For the past 3 years, the movement stopped, but the damage was done. The tilt is more than 2 inches, 60 millimeters across 6 meters. The foundation rests on piles sunk into clay soil. It was meant to be a combined bathhouse and workshop. I could have finished it long ago, but every time I see the crooked floor, my motivation disappears. I will admit, this build has been cursed with setbacks. It feels like I've made every mistake in the book and probably invented a few new ones. The highest point of the warped foundation lies right where the old structure meets the new. My theory? When frost-heave pushed the foundation up and left a void underneath, clay flowed in and filled the gap. 2 years ago I posted about this mess on my Telegram channel, asking for advice. How do I fix a crooked foundation like this? The response was overwhelming. Most people said, tear it down and start over. But then something interesting happened. One of my subscribers, Roman, stepped up with an idea. He offered to let me test out a mini skid loader of his own design on this project. I'd always dreamed of operating an excavator, so reluctantly I decided to try something very risky, using frost-heave itself as part of the solution. By the time Roman's machine Dictum arrived, deep autumn had already set in. Earthworks were off the table. So this little yellow beast spent the winter tucked away in my shed. Remember that old video, cheap storage system? You can tell the shelves weren't even finished back then. Hopefully I'll be able to show you the final results soon. Hey there, squirrel. The core plan looked like this. First, get a hydraulic breaker and demolish this damaged section of the old foundation. Second, dig an L-shaped trench below the piles, running along the front 2 walls. And third, undermine the strip foundation and wait for spring, hoping the thaw will settle the foundation back into place. Yeah, sounds crazy, but don't jump to conclusions just yet. Then it snowed and I couldn't resist. Like a kid in a sandbox, I started practicing with the loader, using it to clear snow. Looking back now, 2 years later, with some actual seed back under my belt, I have to laugh. Everything takes practice, conditioning, and muscle memory. Spring couldn't come soon enough. I was itching to get that machinery dirty, but starting excavation required not just thawed soil, it also meant waiting for groundwater to recede. Timing was everything. While I waited, I hauled a granite slab with the loader, the future base for my metal lathe. I've been upgrading that lathe for years, and installing it on a granite pedestal completely transformed its performance. Shockingly, it didn't cost much either. I think the upcoming video about this setup will surprise you. At the very least, it exceeded my expectations and I'm proud of the result. This story is about more than concrete and clay. It's about risk, learning, and turning mistakes into momentum. Stick around, there is more to come. Let me briefly explain the complexity behind planning the next steps. So I need to dig a trench right here, but there is rubble in the way. Only it's not just rubble, it's actually stone fill meant for a drainage ditch. Which means, before I can move this rubble, I first have to dig the drainage trench and immediately lay the rubble in it. But I don't want to just dump the soil from the trench onto the lawn. I'd prefer to temporarily store it, and ideally in a neat and compact way. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to prep work. All of this has to be done outside working hours, on weekends, but not during vacation. Vacation time is reserved for building cabins, water mills, bridges over streams, and an occasional water vessel. In the meantime, while I'm mulling over the logistics of all this, I managed to make a trip to the forest and collect fallen wood. From that, I prepped a set of stakes to help organize a compact pile of soil, 10 short ones and 2 long ones. The long ones will go into the ground to form makeshift gates. I will staple metal mesh to the stakes to form a frame that can be filled with soil, so it doesn't spill out in a messy cone. Right now on the screen, I'm tying the bases of the stakes together with wire to hold their elliptical shape. And this has turned out to be a completely pointless exercise. Once again, experience proves that not all of my ideas are great. To prevent soil from sifting through the mesh, I lay a strip of geotextile on the inside. This is a spot where trench digging should begin. There's not much room. To be honest, no larger excavator would even fit here. But it's still too early to dig. First, I need to modify my hydraulic dump trailer so it can be unloaded manually without hydraulic assistance. I'll be using an ATV to transport the trailer to the dump site. I acquired an old truck cabin hydraulic lift system from my old friends and decided to mount it on the trailer. On my second try, I secured the pump to a piece of a waterproof plywood, and just like that, the trailer can now operate manually without needing to connect to the skid loader's hydraulic system. The pump lifts a loader trailer with barely any effort. As you can see, this old aluminum tube with a milled notch works just fine as a lever. Here's a layout for the L-shaped drainage trench, which will also serve as a walking path. And here's an obstacle that no longer belongs here, a concrete ring poured decades ago by my great-grandfather. I'll be the one to break it and toss the pieces into the drainage ditch. As they say, breaking is easier than building, generational continuity at work. It seems like everything is ready. The warm-up is done and it's finally time to start digging. And now you'll see just how much I've managed to complicate the task for myself. Not only is there almost no room for machinery in this cramped little corner, but I also decided not just to dig a trench, but to immediately load the excavated soil into a very small trailer. To be honest, just getting the soil into the trailer was no easy feat. And now I had to somehow drive out of here without toppling into that very pit I just dug, while the trailer was completely packed with soil. Roman asked for stress tests on his equipment. Well, here they are, real stress tests. Towing a loaded dump trailer with an ATV is definitely faster than using the skid steer, and it barely leaves any tracks on the lawn. But this method has its downsides too. Let me tell you, reversing a trailer while riding a lightweight machine like this ATV is far from comfortable. And here I discovered firsthand that a 5 cm gap between the ATV's tire and the soil pile fence post is just too tight. And here we are, the first trailer unload. Not everyone agrees with the idea that everything is learned through experience. But to confirm or debunk your theories, you have to run full-scale experiments. Luckily, you get to just sit back and watch the video and learn from my mistakes. The first run is complete. Now I have to fill this entire elliptical soil cage with loads like that. I spent the whole summer waiting for the groundwater to recede, but it never did. Still, I couldn't afford to postpone the project for another season. As you can see, I ended up having to dig below the current groundwater level. Not ideal. Fortunately, the soil here is loose and sandy, not heavy clay mixed with rocks. Second trailer load. Loaded, transported and unloaded. 3 times faster than the first. In the background, you can see my greenhouse. It is more than 20 years old. Its foundation was poured like a basin. No mole is getting in there. Behind the greenhouse is a ditch, and from the right it connects to my old drainage trench. It wraps around 3 sides of the property and drains spring water well, but now it's in my way. I want to break through the concrete wall, remove the rubble, and pass a 4-inch 110mm drainage pipe straight through the trench into the ditch. I split the trench bed into 3 parts so I can lay 3 pipes neatly at the bottom later. These slabs were poured by my father, and I installed them during my student years. I never imagined breaking them would be so difficult. After swinging a hammer and chisel, it's time for a break. Back to the controls of the machinery. Honestly, I feel like a kid in a sandbox, only the sand castles are a bit bigger. Pure joy. As Marcus Manilius said 2000 years ago, labor is its own reward. The soil pile inside the elliptical frame is growing, and to unload the trailer and throw the soil higher, I found it practical to place boards under the wheels as a makeshift ramp. Originally, the plan was to dig the drainage trench 8 inches 20 centimeters deeper, but that wasn't meant to be. The weather didn't allow it. The next steps in the process: lay geotextile fabric along the bottom and walls of the trench, secure it, place the gravel on top of that, and then lay the corrugated drainage pipes. I will secure the pipes in place with bricks along the way. That way, spring water will flow through the underground river with a pleasant gurgle. I paused work for the night, and of course, it rained again. By morning, the wheelbarrow had filled with rainwater. This kept happening all summer. The pond nearly overflowed its banks. I even turned on the pump to drain it in hopes of lowering the groundwater level. My father and I have been building this house since the early 90s. It's a hobby. We faced the facade with hollow bricks, rejecting about 10% of them. Those bricks are useless for anything but rubble. Look, rainwater is already flowing from this barely begun drainage trench. I envy people who don't have problems with high groundwater. And here is what my fire well looks like. Under the concrete slab is 20 feet 6 meters of water, a solid emergency reserve. The cast iron slab makes for a convenient hatch for accessing technical water. As you can see, everything is soaked beneath my feet. Because of this year's weather, continuing earthworks just isn't practical anymore, but it is critical to fill the drainage trench before the ground freezes. Otherwise, the trench walls might collapse in spring, making further work much harder. Fortunately, we had a cold snap overnight, and the water in the trench froze solid. This natural phenomenon is called needle ice. Here is how the geotextile is laid into the trench. First, unroll the geotextile over the top of the trench, then secure it along the wall using nails or stakes. After that, spread it evenly along the bottom of the trench. Once that's done, I can begin placing flat rubble at the base. On top of that, I lay 3 corrugated drainage pipes with discarded bricks placed between them. The method may seem a bit elaborate, but it's clean and efficient, and it helps free up space where those defective bricks were stored. Most importantly, this approach gives me the flexibility to pause earthworks at any moment and switch to other tasks without leaving a mess behind. The trench survived the winter more or less intact, no wall collapses. Over the winter, I lost some fineness in operating the bucket, but it came back quickly. Regaining a skill is way faster than learning it from scratch. Still, as you can see, I did spill quite a bit of soil. You will notice the dump trailer isn't hitched to the ATV, and that's no accident. Look, the main soil pile is already in view. That means the distance from the trench to the pile has been cut in half over the course of the project. At this point, towing the trailer with the ATV no longer makes sense. Now it's faster to unhook the excavator attachment from dictum, attach the tow hitch instead, back up to the trailer, hook it up, and haul it direct to the dump site using the skid loader. I'll tell you right now, maneuvering the trailer with the loader is 10 times easier than dragging it around with the ATV, and unloading it with the skid steer's hydraulics is way faster than using the manual pump. From here on out, progress picked up significantly. This is how I sorted the sod that was scraped up by the bucket, grass and all, and laid it out where I plan to grow a new lawn. Here is a hose that I completely forgotten about. When you dig into the earth, you always uncover something interesting. On this lot alone, we've dug up horseshoes, a finished beer mug, a mortar shell, and toys I lost as a preschooler. Every digger is an archaeologist and treasure hunter at heart. You might remember the trench was supposed to be deeper, so technically the soil pile should have been much higher, but that's okay, the big mound will come later. Next season I plan to dig out a septic pit and tackle more earthworks. This compact soil storage area will make it easier to dry the soil, and once it's dry, I can level the lawn in no time. Now I've finally dug down to the layer of brick rubble that marks the neighbor's drainage ditch. That concludes the training phase on the light soil. At least now I feel confident enough to dig a 5 feet 1.5 meter trench right up against the foundation in heavy clay mixed with stones. Just a second ago it was June in the shot, and now you can see dahlias blooming in the background. Let me explain. I wasn't slacking during the break. First of all, it's clear I laid the corrugated drainage pipes in the trench and braced them with hollow bricks. At that point, I could safely pause work since the trench walls were no longer at risk of collapsing. Second, and more importantly, as you may remember, I'm also an experimental beekeeper. My bottle hive and underground beekeeping experiments take time. Beekeeping is a form of animal husbandry with seasonal tasks that can't be postponed. Unlike a foundation, bees are living creatures, and they always come first. I've invested years into these colonies, and the experimental method I'm developing may eventually help save the Apios mellifera population. That puts it very high on my priority list. To keep the experiment clean, I've had to place most of the hives in the forest no less than 2 miles, 3 kilometers from the main apiary. This type of off-grid beekeeping takes a huge amount of time. Of course, I could have just thrown the bees into a bottle hive on a tree or underground and walk away, but since this is a proper experiment, I have to maintain observation logs. And on top of that, I still have my day job. That said, I believe I will soon have enough data and statistics to present some real conclusions and share a sequel to my bottle beekeeping video, this time on a whole new level. To everyone who supported this work on Patreon, thank you. Without your help, the results wouldn't be nearly as strong. Even now, I can say that the effort to develop a contactless bottle hive method hasn't been wasted. Some of the results look downright implausible to an experienced beekeeper, but I filmed everything, and even I have to sometimes rewatch it to believe my own eyes. In any case, I hope I've justified the long break in the foundation leveling project. You haven't forgotten, this is a video about fixing a foundation, right? Part of the foundation will have to be demolished, which means it's time to bring in the hydraulic breaker. They say demolition is easier than construction, and with this kind of machinery, breaking concrete is an absolute pleasure. My father poured this foundation when I was 4 years old. He spliced 2-meter-long rebar by drilling holes in the ends and wiring them together. Building used to be a lot tougher. That rebar will still come in handy, so I straightened it and stored it away. While I was fussing with the rebar, it started to rain. That means I'll be digging around the foundation in standing water. Not ideal. The temperature dropped, rain is drizzling, and the best way to stay warm is to grab a crowbar. It's also a good chance to visually show the difference between using tools versus doing it all by hand. You can't fight progress. The hydraulic breaker clearly gets the job done faster. I had to break up those large granite rocks too, so they fit in the drainage trench. You can see them there in the background. At the start, it looked like there wasn't much concrete to remove, but in the end, I hauled away 15 full wheelbarrows of broken concrete. There is truth to the saying that most of the foundation is hidden underground. You'd think that huge pile of gravel I had would be more than enough, but it all went into the path, and I'll still need to add a layer of stone dust on top. In the fall, the path was perfectly level, but after freezing and thawing through the winter, it's now full of humps and dips. Now I need to prepare a spot to unload soil from the trench. To do this, I carved an old sump pit with a plank, laid down geotextile, and installed vertical formwork to keep the soil pile from spreading too much. And here where the question arises, isn't all this just preparing for digging a trench? Everything you've seen in this entire long video has been preparation for digging one trench. That's how it goes. 90 to 90% of the work is preparation, and usually that part never makes it into the final cut. This trench, unlike the last one, needs to be much deeper, about as deep as a person's height. That's well below the current groundwater level, which means I'll have to pump the water out. For that, I bought a budget pump and connected it to a hose using my trusty homemade clamper tool. That DIY clamper is still serving me well. Now I'm already half a meter below the groundwater level, but the trench is still dry because I'm removing the water along with the soil as I dig. The moment I stop digging, though, it floods immediately. As you can see, it's getting dark. I've only just started digging and already had to use the pump. If I leave everything like this overnight, the trench wall and soil pile will collapse by morning. From here on, I'll have to dig by hand because it will be impossible to get machinery into the craters it forms. Earlier, I pre-built this form work for the outer trench wall. It's the full length of the planned trench. But by evening, I was too exhausted to continue, so I cut the form work in half and installed just the first section. When the soil starts to shift, there will be serious pressure on the form work. I can brace the top with supports pressed against the foundation. But at the bottom, where the pressure is greatest, there is nothing to brace against. So I will have to drive in stakes, especially since I don't want to restrict soil movement on the right side. The idea is for the soil under the bathhouse to flow into the trench. The bracing is made from slab wood, which you might recognize from my video 7 Secrets of the Chainsaw. Morning has come, and in the daylight I can finally get a good look at the boulder that was such a problem last night. What could I make out of it? Overnight, more water collected. It's time to pump it out. And here is a crack in the foundation. So far, it's the only one I have found, but it is troubling. By the time I started the pump and figure out why it wasn't working, turns out the hose filter in the connector was clogged with sand. More than an hour had passed. There's no way I'll finish digging before nightfall. Please ignore the mess around me. This year, I finally plan to bring order to this corner of the property. Since 1993, when we first started building the house, order has been slowly spreading across the land, and in about 6 years, I hope the process will be complete. You probably noticed that at the beginning of the trench I was digging through sand, but now it's turned to blue clay and cobblestones. Over 80 years ago, an aerial bomb fell here, leaving a massive crater. My great-grandfather filled it with clay that had been blasted to the surface, which is why the clay is now so close to ground level in this corner. Unlike sand, clay has a high frost-heaved coefficient. It was this clay freezing in winter that lifted the corner of my bathhouse. Digging in clay is incredibly difficult. For soil like this, a small bucket would be better, but sticky soil doesn't release easily, so I didn't bother switching buckets. Let's get back to the original plan. The idea was for the foundation along with the soil beneath it to gradually slide into the trench. To help the soil along, I brought a 210 bar pressure washer, planning to use the water jet to undercut the ground. But remember that crack and the condition of the foundation on the opposite side of the trench? The stakes are high. I definitely don't want the foundation to snap in half, so I decided not to wash away the soil aggressively. Instead, I chose to wait for spring, reassess the crack, and measure how much the foundation settled. By early April, the lifted corner had sunk by 1 inch, just over 2 centimeters. The crack hadn't grown. Now I'm wondering, should I destroy the 2 corner piles after all? What would you suggest? Once the work is done, the equipment should be cleaned and stored properly. Interim results. I've only dug one of the 2 planned trenches. Out of the original 6 centimeters of tilt, I have already recovered more than 2. That's not bad, I think. This season, I plan to dig the second trench, fully level the foundation, backfill the trenches with gravel, finally finish building the bathhouse, and enjoy a proper steam session. Or maybe the bathhouse will collapse during the experiments. This was Max Yegorov, and may good people watch good videos. Postscriptum for the most dedicated viewers. They say fools learn from their mistakes, while the wise learn from others. Well, here's a collection of my mistakes. Tip number 1. If you're building with timber, don't wait for it to dry out. Tip number 2 and 3. Always go with a traditional foundation, either strip or pile. Don't mix them. Tip number 4. If you're planning to build a complex, heaped roof like mine, don't be lazy. Firmly tie the top 2 wall crowns together. If the load-bearing rafters drift apart, they will push out the upper beam, and they are very likely to do just that. The roof could collapse. You may have noticed I don't avoid risk, but I always try to keep it measured. As you can see, I joined the corners with metal gussets and angles, bolted them all together. I also tied the opposite walls of the log cabin with beams dovetailed into both crowns, with a number of tightly driven wooden pegs in this log frame. Even a 4-rafter pyramid-style roof won't tear it apart. Tip number 5. Never allow untested people near critical work, especially reading or lifting tasks. It's always safer to work alone. I'm lucky I have a father I trust like myself.
Right? Check it out.